Angels member has been sentenced to life in prison for a gang-motivated murder.
Over 7 decades, the Hells Angels built a reputation as the most feared motorcycle club on Earth, and a handful of men earned it for them.
16 alleged members of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club in Fayetteville now facing a number of charges.
One of the men in this video killed 43 people and walked free in 7 years. Another tortured a couple to death for no reason at all. And a third has been on the run for more than 20 years and has never been caught. These are 15 of the deadliest members the Hells Angels have ever produced. David Wolf Carroll. Almost every dangerous man in the Hells Angels was eventually caught, killed, or convicted. David Carroll is the one who got away. More than 2 decades after he was charged with 13 counts of first-degree murder, the man known as Wolf has never been found, and the authorities hunting him have spent all those years chasing a ghost. Carroll came up the same way the Canadian Hells Angels themselves did. He was born in Nova Scotia and became the leader of a Halifax club called the 13th Tribe. And in 1984, he led that club as it patched over to become the first Hells Angels chapter in Atlantic Canada, with Carroll as its president. From there, he rose into the most exclusive circle in the organization, the Elite Nomads chapter in Quebec. The same inner ring that included Mom Boucher and Walter Stadnik. During the Quebec Biker War, Interpol would later allege, Carroll was involved in the deaths of 13 people and the attempted murder of 2 more, killings tied to the Nomads' campaign to seize control of Montreal's drug trade. In March 2001, the police launched the massive crackdown that broke the back of the Nomads, and warrants went out for the whole chapter. But when they came for Carroll, he was already gone. He had been in Ixtapa, Mexico at the time, and fearing the local police were corrupt, the Canadian authorities did not warn them in advance, so by the time the request to arrest him arrived, Carroll had vanished. The other Nomads went to prison. Wolf disappeared into the world. He has stayed gone ever since. Carroll speaks both English and French. He is believed to have at least $1 million stashed in a numbered offshore account, and he can rely on the Hells Angels network in more than 20 countries to shelter him. Over the years, reported sightings have placed him in Brazil, Mexico, South Africa, and Australia, where he was last seen in 2012. In 2010, Interpol took the rare step of appealing to the public for help finding him, and still nothing came of it. He would be in his 70s now, if he is alive at all. He remains the only member of the Nomads who was never caught, a man charged with 13 murders who has never once had to answer for them, and who may take the whole story to a grave no one will ever find. George Christie. George Christie was not a trigger man. He was something the Hells Angels valued just as much. He was the talker. He was born in Ventura, California in 1947, and he came up fast. By 1976, he was a full-patch member of the Los Angeles chapter, and 2 years later, he founded the Ventura chapter and made himself its president. He would keep that title for more than 30 years, longer than any chapter president in the history of the club. While Sonny Barger picked fights with the establishment, Christie shook its hand. He was the negotiator, the spokesman, the man who could sit across a table from a detective or a journalist and never raise his voice. He was respectable enough that in 1984, the city of Ventura let him carry the Olympic torch through its streets. But the patch always collects its debts. In 2001, Christie spent a year in solitary confinement. Then in 2011, the federal government built a case that cut closer to the bone. 2 rival tattoo parlors had opened in Ventura, competing with a shop connected to the club, and prosecutors said Christie ran a campaign to force them out. First came the threats. When the owners refused to close, the threats became firebombs. Christie was convicted and went to prison for 18 months. The part of his story that lingers is not the arson. It is what the club did when he tried to leave. Christie resigned the presidency in 2011 and walked away after 35 years. And the Hells Angels did not let him go quietly. They excommunicated him on the spot. The man who had spent his life as the acceptable face of the organization learned the same lesson almost everyone on this list eventually learned. Inside that world, loyalty only ever flows one way. Today, he sits on the other side of it, working as a consultant who explains organized crime to the people who once investigated him. Jason Lee Hathaway. On the afternoon of July 22, 2023, Jason Lee Hathaway rode his motorcycle into the parking lot of a Dairy Queen in Wade, North Carolina. He was a Hells Angel out of Indiana. It was an ordinary fast food restaurant on an ordinary summer day. Families eating inside. But Hathaway was not there for the food. He had spotted 3 members of the Pagan Motorcycle Club, the Hells Angels' principal rival on the East Coast. And the Hells Angels leadership had issued a standing order to attack, injure, and kill pagans wherever they found them. Hathaway had just found 3. He immediately attacked one of the pagans with a hammer. The blow missed the man and shattered the glass of his vehicle. But it was 3 against 1 in a busy parking lot, so he immediately called for backup. Soon, his brothers arrived to help. One of the men who came was David Lee Woodall. The fight began again, and this time, the Hells Angels came with hammers, brass knuckles, and fists, and beat the 3 men in broad daylight. Finding no other way to survive, one of the pagans pulled out a gun and fired. The bullet hit one of the Hells Angels and killed him on the spot. The Hells Angels had miscalculated their enemy, and following the standing order had cost them one of their own. Later, 16 members and associates were indicted in the case, including members of the Hells Angels puppet club, the Red Devils. Hathaway and Woodall both pleaded guilty to violent crime in aid of racketeering attempted murder, and in June 2026, a federal judge sentenced Hathaway to 51 months in prison and Woodall to 57. George Wethern, Baby Huey. In September 1972, a Hells Angel named William Pfeiffer was dying of throat cancer in the Alameda County Jail. He knew where the club buried its bodies, and he did not want to die behind bars. So he made the police an offer: immunity and a few months of freedom in exchange for the location of a Hells Angels graveyard. The graveyard was a ranch near Ukiah, 156 acres of farmland that belonged to George Wethern. Wethern was called Baby Huey. He was a 260-pound enforcer who had risen to vice president of the Oakland chapter through his friendship with the club president, Sonny Barger. By 1960, he was the number 2 man in the most powerful chapter the Hells Angels had. His ranch had been bought with club money and put in his name, and the club used it to make people disappear. The police followed Pfeiffer's directions to the property. They found cocaine, they found weapons, and in the abandoned wells on the land, they found the bodies. 2 were club prospects, Charlie Baker and Big Tom Shull. At a party in January 1971, their drinks were spiked with LSD, and while they were helpless, they were beaten and strangled and dropped into the wells. They had been there about a year. In another well was a woman, shot once in the head 6 months before the police arrived. Wethern had earned his place in all of this 3 years earlier. In 1969, high at a party, he shot a fellow member named William Mitten. The shooting left him owing a debt to the club. He paid it by letting them bury their dead on his land. Faced with a murder charge, Baby Huey broke. He took the immunity deal and told the police everything. The number 2 man in the Oakland Hells Angels, the friend of Sonny Barger, testified against his own club and disappeared into witness protection with his wife and children. His testimony landed the same month the California Attorney General released a report calling the Hells Angels a key part of organized crime in the state. The district attorney who secured the deal said it out loud. "This is the beginning of the end of the Hells Angels." He was wrong, but the wells were real, and the man who filled them had been the second most powerful angel in Oakland. David Richards. In 1984, a 16-year-old boy named Michael Groves was murdered in a flat in West London. He was attacked with a hammer, a wrench, and a knife, and by the end, he had 56 separate injuries on his body. When it was over, the killer dipped into the boy's blood and wrote 2 words on the wall: Hells Angels. No reason for the killing was ever established. Groves was 16, just starting out in life, and the man who beat and stabbed him to death had no motive that the courts could name. What is known is who did it. David Richards, a British member of the club, killed the boy with his girlfriend, and in December 1984, the two of them were sentenced to a minimum of 16 years. Richards went to prison, and for 2 decades, that was the end of it. Then the system lost him. In May 2006, after serving 21 years and only months from his scheduled release, Richards walked out of HM Prison Sudbury, an open prison with minimal security, and did not come back. The police logged the escape on their system. Then they did almost nothing. He fled to Ireland, where he was jailed for 3 months for a robbery, and the Irish authorities never learned that the man in front of them was a convicted child killer on the run from England. When he was released, he returned to England and settled in Wolverhampton. He did not hide the way a fugitive is supposed to hide. He lived openly. He visited his parents. He claimed benefits. He used his passport to travel. At one point, he called the police himself to complain about local kids misbehaving near his home. The man who had murdered a teenager and signed it in blood was filing complaints with the same police who were supposed to be looking for him. And for years, no one came. It lasted until 2014. On the 6th of June that year, acting on a tip-off, the Metropolitan Police arrested Richards at his home. On the 1st of September, he was sentenced to 2.5 years for escaping custody and returned to prison. The boy's sister, Louise Bull, spoke for the family afterward. This man, she said, had been living a normal life after brutally killing her brother, and the police had done nothing to recapture him. Michael, she said, was a lovely boy who was just starting out in life. He had been 16. His killer had walked free for the better part of a decade in plain sight, while the system that was supposed to be holding him barely noticed he was gone. Adam Lee Hall. David Glasser was a 44-year-old man from Pittsfield, Massachusetts, who did odd jobs for a Hells Angel named Adam Lee Hall. In July 2009, Hall decided Glasser had stolen carburetors from him. He beat Glasser with a baseball bat until his face was black and blue and swollen, forced him to sign over the title to his truck, and told him that if he went to the police, he would put 2 bullets in his head. Glasser went to the police anyway. He became a witness against Hall, who was the sergeant-at-arms of the Berkshire chapter of the Hells Angels, on drug, gun, and assault charges. And from that point on, Hall worked to make sure Glasser never testified. He threatened him. He framed him for a fake armed robbery in New York to discredit him. Glasser, terrified, went back to the police more than once and asked for witness protection. He was told nothing could be done and to call if anything happened. A month before he died, he told a friend he was certain Hall was going to kill him. In August 2011, weeks before Glasser was set to testify, he was sheltering from Tropical Storm Irene in his Pittsfield apartment with his roommate Edward Frampton and a friend named Robert Chadwell. Hall came for him there, but he did not take only Glasser. He took all 3. Hall did not act alone. He brought Caius Vaovis, who was hoping the job would earn him a shot at Hells Angels membership, and David Chalieu. The 3 victims were kidnapped, shot, and dismembered, and their bodies were buried in a trench in the woods in Beckett. Frampton and Chadwell had no part in any case against Hall. They were killed because they were in the apartment, and the apartment was where Glasser was. The murders were solved because someone talked. A man named David Casey, who had used his excavator to bury the bodies, testified that Hall had described shooting and gutting the victims, and that he told Glasser, "I warned you what would happen if you testified against me before killing him." Chalieu had also spoken about the killings to another inmate, and that man became a witness too. In 2014, all 3 killers were convicted. Hall was sentenced to consecutive life terms with no possibility of parole. The case revealed how Hall's mind worked. In the months before the murders, he had asked the FBI to let him become an informant against his own club in exchange for leniency. The FBI turned him down, telling the court he was much too dangerous. So Hall solved his problem the only other way he knew. The witness could not testify if the witness was dead. He killed Glasser to bury the case, and killed 2 more men because they happened to be standing next to it. Phil Boudreault. In the summer of 1996, a shy, baby-faced 20-year-old from Sudbury, Ontario, stood in front of a national television camera and talked about the biggest day of his life. His name was Phil Boudreault, and he had just pulled off an upset win in the boxing tournament at the Atlanta Olympics. "This morning I ate breakfast and I puked my guts out," he told the interviewer, before saying hello to his family and his young daughter back home. He was a welterweight, fast and fearless. And for a few weeks that summer, he was a Canadian hero. He made it all the way to the medal round, where he lost a close decision to a Russian boxer and finished just short of an Olympic medal. What the Olympic officials did not know was that Boudreault was already living a second life. He had joined the Sudbury chapter of the Satan's Choice Motorcycle Club as a young man and kept it hidden from the boxing world. When the parade in his honor rolled through Sudbury after the Olympics, the celebration was cut short. At the autograph signing that followed, Sudbury police walked in and arrested him on an outstanding warrant. The hero and the outlaw were the same man, and the second one was taking over. When Satan's Choice merged into the Hells Angels, Boudreault went with it, and over the next 30 years he rose to become a leader in the club in the Ottawa region. The discipline that had made him an Olympic athlete was gone, replaced by something the courts kept seeing. In 2004, he beat 2 people in a Sudbury bar so badly that one victim's jaw was broken in 3 places, and he was convicted, and then convicted again for uttering death threats against police officers during the trial. He went to prison, was placed under a long-term supervision order meant to keep dangerous offenders in check, and violated it with failed drug tests and continued ties to the criminal world. In the crime world, he had earned a new name. They called him Crazy. Life caught up with him on a Saturday morning in April 2016. Boudreault was riding his motorcycle near La Chute, Quebec, with another biker when a blue and gray SUV pulled up alongside them and opened fire. Witnesses counted 10 to 15 shots. 2 bullets hit Boudreault, punctured his lung, and drove shrapnel into his vertebrae. He fell off his bike and was found slumped in a ditch. He survived, but the man who had once boxed for his country never walked again. The shooting put him in a wheelchair, and in the years that followed, he lost a leg. He held on for almost a decade after that. In January 2026, at the age of 50, Phil Boudreault died from the infections and sepsis that had followed him ever since the bullets went in. The Olympic hero and the high-ranking Hells Angel had been the same person all along, and the violence he had lived in finally finished what the SUV had started. James Jim Brandis, early one morning in October 1977, a narcotics agent named William Zerby woke to the sound of a car engine running outside his home. And when he looked out, he recognized the man behind the wheel as a Hells Angel named Jim Brandis. Zerby had been chasing Brandis for months, and Brandis wanted him gone, though not killed so much as crippled, because Brandis lived by the idea that a dead man stops hurting while a man left alive and broken suffers and keeps you satisfied. James Brandis was not an ordinary biker, but one of Sonny Barger's top lieutenants in the 1970s, close to the very top of the Oakland chapter, and his reputation traveled with him wherever he went. When he flew to Australia to visit the Melbourne chapter, the bikers there already had a name waiting for him, and that name was the Assassin. Police believed he was involved in multiple murders, but the charges never managed to stick. Car bombs were his trademark, and the agent hunting him soon became his target. Zerby had spent months building a case against Brandis, but Brandis wanted him off it. So when Zerby caught him watching the house that morning and searched his car a short time later, what he found amounted to a warning. There was a military handbook on booby traps, and there was an address book that held Zerby's own home address, phone number, and license plate. Not long after that, a bomb tore apart Zerby's car, and although he survived, the injuries were bad enough to end his career. He was not the only one, because a San Jose police sergeant named John Cracked had also gone after Brandis, and he too was nearly killed by a car bomb, with Brandis accused of planting both. His name also surfaced in the worst Hells Angels crime of the decade, when in 1977, a young woman named Margot Compton fled an Angels Run prostitution ring and agreed to help police shut it down. Before she could, she was shot dead in her home, and so were her boyfriend and her 6-year-old twin daughters. In 1982, the world got a clear look at how dangerous the authorities believed Brandis to be when he landed at Melbourne Airport, and an Australian detective named Bob Armstrong had him detained and his luggage searched. What Armstrong did not yet know was that he had already become Brandis's next target, because inside the luggage was a photograph of Armstrong himself, along with the detective's home address. Alongside it, the search turned up thumbscrews and a device for finding hidden listening bugs. And buried among it all were the secret passwords to the computer files of the United States Department of Justice, which would have let the Hells Angels read the most sensitive investigations being run against them. Brandis was deported for lying about his criminal record to get into the country. In the end, the man police could never convict ran out of time in a courtroom because once he was tied at last to the Compton murders, Brandis killed himself in prison between his first and second trial. For 2 decades, he had been one of the most feared enforcers the Hells Angels ever had, accused of bombings and executions, and yet he died before a jury ever got the chance to call him guilty. Benjamin Silva. On January 11th, 1981, a young couple named Kevin Thorpe and Laura Craig were driving home to Oregon after winter break when they stopped near the tiny town of Madeline in Lassen County, California, to change a tire. Thorpe was 21 and Craig was 20. While they were stopped, a car pulled in behind them with a red light flashing on the dashboard, and because it looked like a police vehicle, they did the natural thing and let the men approach. Little did they know the men were Hells Angels, and one of them was a fugitive named Benjamin Silva. Silva, along with his accomplice Joe Shelton and a third man named Norman Thomas, kidnapped the couple at gunpoint and drove them to an isolated property, where they held them captive for days. Over that time, Craig was raped repeatedly, and Thorpe was stripped naked and chained to a tree, and left exposed to the winter cold. When the men were finished with him, Silva and Shelton shot Thorpe to death with an automatic weapon, and afterward Thomas dismembered the body with an axe and buried the remains in shallow graves in trash bags. Craig met the same end soon after. The most chilling part of the case was that there was no reason for any of it. Thorpe and Craig were not targets. They were strangers who had simply stopped to fix a flat tire on the wrong stretch of road, chosen at random by men who tortured and killed them for nothing more than the chance to do it. When investigators finally caught up with him, the savagery of the crime sent Silva to California's death row in 1982. And for years it appeared he would be executed for what he had done. But the sentence did not hold. A federal appeals court later overturned it because of failures by Silva's own defense lawyer, who had never properly examined his client's mental history before trial. The death sentence was reduced to life, and in 2007, more than a quarter century after the murders, Silva pleaded no contest to the killing of Kevin Thorpe and was given 25 years to life. The execution chamber that once seemed certain for him never claimed him, and his case still resurfaces at parole hearings to this day. Walter Nugget Stadnik. Walter Stadnik did not look like the most powerful biker in Canada. He stood only 5'4", and his face and arms were badly scarred from a 1984 crash when a car driven by a priest collided with his motorcycle and set off a fire that burned him. He was a unilingual English speaker from Hamilton, Ontario, in a Hells Angels world that was then almost entirely French-Canadian, which should have made him an outsider with no path to power. Instead, he became the most important figure in the history of the club in Canada. What Stadnik had was not size or muscle, but intelligence, patience, and a vision none of his rivals could match. He understood that the real money was not in any single city, but in building a national organization. So while other bikers fought over street corners, he spent years traveling to places the mafia had never bothered with. Towns in Manitoba and northern Ontario, where there were no crime families but plenty of people who wanted drugs. He rose through the ranks to become the third national president of the Canadian Hells Angels. And from that seat, he did something no one had done before. turning a scattered collection of chapters into a single dominant empire that stretched from Quebec across Ontario and Manitoba and into British Columbia. Where he could, he absorbed rival clubs by persuading them to patch over and join him, and where he could not persuade, the Angels simply defeated them. In 1995, he helped found the Elite Nomads chapter, the small inner circle of the most powerful Hells Angels in the country, and it was the Nomads who ran the Quebec biker war against the Rock Machine for control of Montreal's drug trade. The scale of what Stadnik was overseeing came out later in his own financial records, which showed that in a single year he and his partner moved nearly $12 million worth of cocaine and hashish, even as the two of them declared a combined income of less than $30,000. The law had tried and failed to convict Stadnik 3 separate times before, but in 2001, a massive crackdown on the Quebec Hells Angels finally swept him up. Prosecutors charged him with 13 counts of first-degree murder for the killings carried out during the war, arguing that as the general of the organization, he was responsible for everything his soldiers did. The judge did not accept it, ruling that knowing about the murders was not the same as ordering them, and Stadnik was acquitted of all 13, but the rest of the case held. And in 2004, he was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder, drug trafficking, and gangsterism, and sentenced to 20 years in prison. By then, it no longer mattered, because the machine he had built was so powerful that it kept running without him, and the Hells Angels remained the dominant outlaw club in Canada long after their architect was gone. Scott Steinert. Scott Steinert was an unlikely man to reach the top of the Hells Angels. He was born in Wisconsin and moved to Quebec as a child, an American outsider in a French-Canadian club. And yet, by the early 1990s, he had clawed his way into the Montreal chapter and become one of the most feared men in the entire organization. The reason was simple. When Mom Boucher needed someone killed, Steinert was the man who did it. A police informant named Danny Kane explained it to his handlers in a single line, telling them that Boucher handed out the execution orders for the war against the Rock Machine, and that Steinert was the executioner. He was a skilled bomb maker who once bought aerial photographs of Montreal, so he could plan assassinations from above, and he paid cash bounties to anyone who killed a Rock Machine member. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police described him as a violent and cruel psychopath who could not control himself, and he is widely believed to be the man who set off the car bomb on August 9th, 1995, that was meant for a rival, but instead drove a piece of shrapnel into the head of 11-year-old Daniel Desrochers, the first innocent victim of the entire war. But the same ruthlessness that made Steinert valuable also made him a threat to the powerful men who ranked above him, and in the end, it was not the police or a rival club that brought him down. His fate came on November 4th, 1997, when he was summoned to a meeting at the Hells Angels clubhouse in Sorel. A Crown witness later described what happened inside, testifying that they killed Steinert with a hammer, smashed his skull, and threw him into the river. When his body finally surfaced from the St. Lawrence in the spring of 1999, the truth became clear. The executioner of the biker war had himself been executed, not by an enemy, but by his own club. The full story of how the most feared enforcer in the Hells Angels ended up dead at the hands of his own brothers is one worth telling on its own. Alan Pasaro. On December 6, 1969, the Rolling Stones played a free concert at the Altamont Speedway in California in front of 300,000 people, and the Hells Angels had been hired to guard the stage. As the band played, an 18-year-old named Meredith Hunter pushed toward the front of the crowd, and at some point he pulled out a revolver. A Hells Angel named Alan Pasaro saw the gun, lunged off the stage, and stabbed Hunter to death just feet from where Mick Jagger was singing. What sets this killing apart is that it was filmed. A documentary crew was shooting the concert for a movie that became Gimme Shelter, and the cameras caught the stabbing as it happened, turning a single death in a crowd into the most famous killing in the history of the Hells Angels. The footage played in theaters, and a generation that had romanticized the outlaw biker watched one of them kill a teenager on screen. The legal outcome, though, was not what people tend to remember. Because Hunter had drawn a gun, Pasaro was tried and acquitted, with the court accepting that he had acted in self-defense. And decades later, in 2005, investigators formally closed the case, having confirmed he was the lone attacker. Yet a shadow has always hung over that verdict, because a witness who was there told Rolling Stone in 1970 that the Angels had set upon Hunter before anyone knew he was armed, chasing him through the crowd and beating him, and that only then did one of them pull a knife and stab him in the back. Whatever the full truth of that night, Altamont became the moment the world stopped seeing the Hells Angels as folk heroes and started seeing them as something far more dangerous. Sonny Barger. Sonny Barger may have killed fewer people than almost anyone else here, and he is still one of the most dangerous men the Hells Angels ever produced, because without him, none of the others would have had an organization to kill for. Barger did not invent the Hells Angels, but he is the man who turned them from a loose scattering of California drinking clubs into a disciplined international machine, and every enforcer and hitman who came after him operated inside the structure he built. Born in Modesto in 1938 and raised in Oakland, Barger founded the Oakland chapter in 1957 and quickly became the most powerful figure in the club. When he found there were other clubs across California already using the Hells Angels name, he did not fight them. He organized them, dividing up territory, writing bylaws, and binding the scattered chapters into a single body that he formally incorporated in 1966. He gave the Hells Angels the things a criminal organization needs to survive: rank, rules, discipline, and a chain of command. He also helped popularize the one-percenter identity and standardize the club's image down to the spelling of its name. The law spent years trying to prove that the organization Barger built was a criminal enterprise and that he sat at the top of it. In 1979, federal prosecutors indicted him and dozens of other members under the same racketeering laws designed to dismantle the mafia, but the case collapsed. After an 8-month trial, the jury deadlocked. A mistrial was declared, and Barger was acquitted of the racketeering charges. He was no stranger to a cell, though, serving time over the years on weapons and heroin convictions. And in one case, he went to prison for conspiring to blow up a rival Outlaws clubhouse. What makes Barger so dangerous is not a body count, but a count of consequences. The methamphetamine trade that funded the club, the territorial wars fought across continents, the assassinations carried out by men like Trudeau and Steinert and Carroll. All of it happened inside the framework he designed. He always insisted the Hells Angels were just a club of men who loved to ride, and he held that line to the end, dying of cancer in 2022 at the age of 83. By then, the organization he had shaped had become exactly what the authorities always said it was, and it had outlived its architect without missing a beat. Maurice "Mom" Boucher. Most killers take orders. Mom Boucher gave them. He was the man who turned the Quebec Hells Angels into a war machine, and he was willing to drag an entire province into the bloodshed to control its drug trade. Boucher was born in 1953 and raised in deep poverty in the Hochelaga-Maisonneuve district of East Montreal. He dropped out of school early, drifted through crime, and joined the Hells Angels in 1987, where his discipline and ruthlessness pushed him up the ranks fast. By 1995, he had built the elite Nomads chapter, the small inner circle of the most powerful angels in the province. And from that seat, he issued a single demand that set everything in motion. Every drug dealer in Montreal would buy from the Hells Angels or face the consequences. When the rival rock machine refused, the Quebec Biker War began. It became one of the bloodiest conflicts in Canadian history. Over 8 years, it killed more than 160 people and wounded over 200 more, and among the dead was an 11-year-old boy struck by a car bomb meant for a rival. But the moment that set Boucher apart came when he turned his violence on the state itself. To frighten the justice system into backing off, he ordered the murders of prison guards, people killed for nothing more than the uniform they wore. His logic was cold and simple. If officers of the state could be killed for doing their jobs, then judges and prosecutors might think twice about coming after him. For a while, it worked. Boucher was tried for the guard murders in 1998 and acquitted, walking out of court the most feared man in the country. But the police kept building their case, and they found the one man who could bring him down in Stéphane Gagné, who had carried out the killings on Boucher's orders. On Gagné's testimony, Boucher was convicted in 2002 of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 of attempted murder, and sentenced to life. He never walked free again. He died of throat cancer behind bars in 2022, 3 years before he would even have been able to ask for parole. Yves, Apache, Trudeau. He was the smallest man in almost every room he entered, 5'6" and slightly built. A man nobody noticed. But he killed 43 people. No member in the history of the Hells Angels, anywhere in the world, has a confirmed body count that comes close. And that is what makes Yves Trudeau the deadliest of them all. Trudeau learned his trade before he ever put on a patch. As a young man, he took a job at a plant on the south shore of Montreal that manufactured industrial explosives, and the knowledge he picked up there, how a bomb is built and how it is set off, would soon make him far more valuable to the men he was about to fall in with. He carried that knowledge into the Popeyes, a Montreal biker gang deep in contract killing for the Mafia. And when the Popeyes patched over to become the first official Hells Angels chapter in Canada in 1977, Trudeau became a founding member of the club in this country. He was already a killer before he ever wore the Death's head, and the crime writer James Boudreault would later describe him simply as a man with no conscience and no respect for human life at all. Over 15 years, Trudeau killed in every way a man can kill. He admitted to carrying out the murders himself with a mix of methods, 29 of them with guns, 10 with bombs, 3 with baseball bats, and 1 by strangulation, and he claimed to have been an accomplice in the rest. He killed for the Hells Angels, and he killed for rival organizations, taking contracts from whoever was paying. But his heavy cocaine habit and his growing unpredictability eventually turned the club against him. By 1985, his own brothers had decided he was a liability, and during the Lennoxville Purge, when the Hells Angels lured 5 of their own members to a clubhouse and murdered them, Trudeau was meant to be among the dead. He survived only because he had checked himself into a drug detox facility the week before, with no idea his brothers had marked him to be dumped in the river. Knowing there was a $50,000 contract on his life, Trudeau did the one thing no full-patch Hells Angel in Canada had ever done. He turned. He became a police informant, and what he gave them was staggering, helping solve roughly 90 unsolved murders, 43 of which he had committed himself. He pleaded guilty to 43 counts of manslaughter, and in a deal that stunned the public, he was sentenced to life with parole eligibility in just 7 years. Trudeau was released in 1994 under a new identity and went to work as an orderly in a nursing home and a driver for disabled people. The deadliest hitman in Canadian history, quietly hidden among the vulnerable. Then, in 2004, he was arrested for sexually assaulting a 14-year-old boy and sent back to prison for life. He was dying of cancer by then, and he died behind bars in 2008. The sister of one of his victims spoke for many when she said that to a man like Trudeau, killing was like buying a bag of milk, and that the cancer eating him was simply justice finally arriving. For all the fear these names carry, the Hells Angels have spent decades trying to sell the world a very different image, one of brotherhood, freedom, and the open road. And it has worked well enough that some of the most famous people alive have been drawn into their orbit, from movie stars to musicians to men who actually wore the patch. Click the next video to see which celebrities have real documented ties to outlaw motorcycle clubs, and how close some of them came to that world.